Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Trident University Marketing Specialist Daniel Sloan, and we're excited to be bringing you today's Culture of Research and Education webinar titled Student Health, Before and After the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act. The core webinar series is designed to provide faculty, students, and alumni an opportunity to share their research with the Trident community. By fostering a culture of professional development and idea exchange, participants will have access to a valuable forum for lifelong learning. This university-wide effort is coordinated by Dr. Heidi Gilligan, Dean of the College of Education and the university's Doctoral Studies Directors. A few notes before we get into the presentation. Everyone, feel free to submit questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar where our host and our presenter will be there to field your questions. If you have any technical issues or comments to share, you can email me directly at daniel.sloan, that's S-L-O-A-N, @trident.edu. This webinar will be recorded and all attendees will receive a link to this webinar and a copy of the slides later this week. Today's session will be hosted by Dr. Carlos Cardillo. Dr. Cardillo is a PhD mentor and professor at Trident. He's taught in both the PhD in Health Sciences and Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences programs, and has 25 years of health science experience in various industries. He received his PhD in Health Sciences at Trident, and some of his areas of expertise include organizational change, human factor research design, and health sciences. So I'm going to hand things off to our host to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Cardillo, take it away.
Thank you, Daniel, and good afternoon and welcome, everyone. It is always an honor to be part of this webinar series, particularly those that are related to results produced by doctoral students in their dissertations. Today's presentation is a clear example of the hard work and dedication placed in a dissertation proposal and how years of courses taken in the PhD program can produce a research with outcomes that benefit the public, the educational systems, our children, and many other stakeholders that can use current results to change or apply policies or use those results to create new research questions and studies that can further our knowledge in the public health arena. So without taking too much time on this and introducing the research, let's get to the important part and the reason why we're here. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cris Ritenour. She will present her research titled Student Health Before and After the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act. And this is a research that I'm particularly proud of. I was the chair on Chris's dissertation, and I think you will enjoy the presentation. You will enjoy what is there and how this can be applied on real life. So, Cris, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone to the webinar tonight. I would like to explain to you today my dissertation that was completed at Trident University International in 2012, entitled Comparison of Student BMI Before and After the National School Lunch Program Nutritional Changes of 2012. The nutritional programs in schools became of interest to me when I began as a teacher in the school district, and I noticed that the National Health and Nutrition Examination Surveys had recorded a steady increase in childhood obesity throughout the past few decades. As a health teacher, this is an area that I am responsible for, in my opinion, so I started to look into it. Now, the obesity that these studies are speaking of is called visceral adiposity, or the size, not necessarily the number of fat cells in and around the organs, are getting larger because these cells act in a pro-inflammatory type manner. To explain visceral adiposity, visceral adiposity is or occurs when one consumes pro-inflammatory foods. When this happens, proteins are released in the system. This is called gene expression, and the fat cells will increase in size. As a result of this inflammation, the risks for chronic diseases, often diseases that are carried into adulthood, will also increase. These diseases are very common throughout the country. They include cardiovascular diseases or disorders such as hypertension, vascular disease, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndromes. There are also disorders of the pulmonary or respiratory system, such as hyperreactive airway disease, asthma, sleep apnea, and even psychological disorders like depression. However, this is a reversible phenomenon that takes place. Heredity is modifiable. The gene expression can be altered. This is called epigenetics. Genetic signatures, are created from chronic activation of that inflammatory response that causes these metabolic disorders. These genetic marks are made within us, and then they can be transferred from parent to child. These can be negative and they can be positive. So if you're creating an inflammatory response from food, these gene expressions, even transgenerational gene expressions, are reversible because epigenetic signatures are reversible. So if we were to replace the foods causing inflammation with those with anti-inflammatory effects, over time, the risks of illness will lessen from generation to generation. To give an example, this is just an image of how one generation can pass the same signature into 3 generations. So a woman who smokes while pregnant creates a signature for herself, for her unborn child, and then her daughter's or child's reproductive cells will also carry that signature. So if we were to overeat, cause the inflammation that leads to obesity, we would pass that trait to our children and our children's children just as well. So what does the research currently say? Right now, my literature review, or the past research, has said that parent educational level is negatively associated with BMI, which was the main focus of my study, body mass index, measured as underweight, healthy, overweight, or obese. So the more education that parents have, the lesser chance or the lower their children would be on the scale for obesity. Economically, socioeconomic status was also negatively associated with BMI. So the higher the income in the family, the lower the BMI scale would be. Ethnicity, there has been found to be associations with ethnicity, and race. Gender has had mixed reviews in the findings. There has been a finding that modifications in diet have differing effects on males versus females, but the effects are more so on the males. So if both were equally to change their diet or improve upon their diet, the males seem to have lost the visceral adipose more so than the females. As far as physical activity goes, there is an association with BMI levels, but there is a lesser effect of physical activity on BMI than there is for diet and BMI. And the last one there is food sources, which is what I focused my study on, specifically home-packed versus school-purchased meal. There is an abundance of findings throughout history showing that the home-packed meals were deemed unhealthy as compared to school-purchased. And when I say unhealthy, I mean they cause more inflammation than the home-packed meals, or the school-purchased meals, looking at sodium levels, sugar levels, total calories, and saturated fats. So what has been done in the past and what can be done for the future? Clear back in 1993, the School Meals Initiative for Healthy Children was implemented to improve the nutritional standards of school meals. This was a federal program that was trying to feed our children, our youth, healthier. Almost 20 years later, former First Lady Michelle Obama and the United States Dairy Association teamed up to build upon the initial concept of the School Meals Initiative and make it even better. And they created the Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act of 2012. The goal was to raise a healthier generation by even further improving the nutritional values of school meals, and they based this on the latest scientific evidence, which I just explained, the inflammation process. What they considered in this program was the feasibility, and that's as far as preparation of the foods and the costs of the foods and the implementation costs. Most of the requirements of the plan, which I'll explain to you in a second, were implemented between July of 2011 and July of 2012, and by the beginning of the school year in 2012-13, all of the standards were required to have been met. So if we were to look at the two programs, 1993 compared to the current Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act, you can see in the first column the previous requirements. Originally, there was a fruit and vegetable category, and that was a combination of fruits or vegetables. So as long as the school system was hitting that 1.5 to 3 cups, 3/4 cup serving, it didn't matter if it was all fruits, all vegetables, or some type of combination. There was also no specific type of vegetable or subgroup that needed to be served. If you look then at the current requirements, the new program has separated the vegetables and the fruits, so every meal has to have a vegetable and a fruit, not just a combination. And they also made a weekly requirement for the different subcategories of vegetables. The dark green vegetables, which are very important for anti-inflammatory effects, red or orange vegetables, beans and peas, starchy, and there's an other category to separate the vegetables that are served. The meats and the meats are alternative. There was just a general minimum serving level. The current requirements make a daily requirement, a weekly requirement, and they've separated the servings according to age or grade level. For the grains, the changes that took place was grains originally just had 8 servings per week, and they did want at least 1 serving per day. The new requirements, again, made a minimum for the week, minimum for the day, and they separated it by grades. They also took it one step farther, saying that all grains had to be whole grain rich for this program. And finally, the milk category. In 1993, the standard was 1 cup of any milk. There was any fat content allowed and any flavor. And the current requirements is, again, that 1 cup of milk. But if it's flavored, it had to be fat-free. And if it is white milk, it has to be 1%. So they limited the amount of fat that is in that milk. Looking at the changes in calories and the way that meals are planned. The previous requirements, schools had 3 choices as to how they planned their menus. They had the traditional meal planning, which consisted of those 5 required items: the milks, the meats, the vegetables, the fruits, and the grains. And you just went by those foods as long as those food items were there. And then there were set calories for the different grade segments. They can also choose the enhanced menu planning, which was the same 5 food components, but they increased the vegetable and fruit servings along with the breads, and then set calories accordingly. The nutrient-based meal planning was the final choice that a school system would have to use, and that was a computer-based program where the schools could put the food items in that they planned on serving. The computer would analyze it and give a list of the nutrients in that meal so that schools can make sure they were providing all the necessary nutrients, and then they base those calories off of that. The current requirements are food-based meal planning only. They do have separated calorie recommendations for each of the grade levels, but we go by foods that either inflame the system or hopefully they're not serving the ones that do inflame the system, although there still are some areas that need improvement. So getting into my research, the hypothesis that I had come up with, 3 things could happen and there could be different outcomes for each. The school standards of 2012 could either have lunch sales that were unchanged. This is the total number of lunches that were sold per school year. If the sales numbers did not change, my prediction was a decrease in student BMI because the same number of kids are buying those meals and they would be more nutritious and healthier for them, so their body fat levels should decrease. If there was found to be an increase in school lunch sales, I again predicted a decrease in student BMI because if there are more students purchasing those now healthier meals, that means there are less students eating the home-packed meals that were already proven to be unhealthy as compared to the school-sold meals. And finally, if decreases in school lunch sales were found, 2 things could possibly occur. There could be an increase in BMI because that means more kids or students would be bringing the unhealthy meals from home, or BMI could remain unchanged, which may indicate that this changes in the program had no effect at all on student BMI. So methods for my study. The study examined differences in grade school students' BMI percentiles before and after the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act of 2012 and the factors that may have influenced those differences, such as gender, for example. The data that I collected was from the Pennsylvania Department of Health and the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and I studied BMI percentiles as variables. Again, that was underweight, as categories, healthy, overweight, and obese, ethnicity, and the number of students in each ethnic category, the number of males versus females per study year, the number of students enrolled each year, the number of students that were eligible for free or reduced lunches, which was an indicator of socioeconomic status, and the total number of lunches that were schooled per study year. I studied K through 12th grade students for all private, public, and charter schools using Montour, Berks, and Philadelphia counties in Pennsylvania. Those counties were chosen as a sample for the population of the state. Montour County was lowest on socioeconomic status for the state in 2008-09. Berks ranged right in the middle, and Philadelphia County was highest number of students in the socioeconomic category. And I studied school years 2008-2009 and compared those statistics to 2012-13 because 2008 and 9 was prior to the implementation of the program, which was published actually in 2010. So some of the schools got a head start on implementing the program, so I had to get a year that was completely before the start. And then 2012-13 because that was post-implementation requirement, so 1 full study year after the transition was made for the school lunches. As a result for my studies, this first chart here shows the primary focus of my study, which was to determine if there was a difference in BMI percentiles for the school-age students before and after the implementation of the program. I conducted a chi-square on the percentiles, and there was found to be a significant difference, an actual decrease in the number of obese students, or percentage, excuse me, of obese students between those 2 study years. So the next thing I needed to do was find out why, if I could find a trend in any of the other variables that may have caused that decrease in obesity. So the next tests that were run were 2 additional chi-squares, thank you, and 3 t-tests to find significance. The numbers of males versus females were almost identical between 2008 and 2012-13. So there was no significant difference in those numbers. Ethnic categories, however, were significant. And this was a trend that was found in past research, so it was expected. Specifically, there was a significant difference in the number of BMI percentile changes for the Black or African American category, and a slightly less of a change for the other category in ethnicity. Looking at student enrollment, there was no significant difference in the number of students that were enrolled each year. There was also a significant difference in the number of lunches that were sold. Many more were sold in 2012-13 after the new standards were put in as compared to the first study year. And finally, the free and reduced lunch eligibility was insignificant. So it was almost the same amount of students eligible, meaning that socioeconomic status had not changed. Discussing these findings, there are some pros and there are some cons. The cons of the program in general came with the program costs exceeding the original plans of fiscal feasibility. It was intended to be possible for all schools to meet these standards without a large strain on their budgets, and it costs a lot more than planned. So many schools found that the food preparation efforts increased to prepare fresh fruits and vegetables as compared to opening a can or a bag of something frozen, added costs, and they had to bring in more people to get that job done. The cost of the food itself was also higher because it does cost more to buy fresh foods than it does, again, for the frozen or the canned. However, the pros of this project or program, in my personal opinion, outweigh those cons. The Healthy, Hungry-Free Kids Act did decrease childhood BMI as planned. So it is making our children healthier, which can be transferred generation to generation. There is a surplus of healthier meals sold to America's youth, which as a parent, it's nice to know that you can send your children to school where they're getting fed healthy, nutritious meals. And you also need to consider those costs that seemed cumbersome for most, but the overall program costs versus the cost to care for chronic diseases caused by childhood obesity, they're really not comparable. Those costs after you get diseases last a lifetime. The program costs that initially took place for implementation and preparations for these foods, most schools have learned to balance that budget and make it work for the kids. The next steps. The evaluation of longevity, how well the plan is still working, needs to be examined. If this study were to be repeated with current BMI statistics, would those numbers have increased? More students are, more students are starting to gain that weight back, that visceral adipose fat. Have they maintained? Or have the numbers continued to decrease as far as BMI goes? Are the students continuing to lose that visceral adiposity? And if so, we also don't want them to go into the unhealthy category. Ideally, most of the students will range in the healthy categories. program can also be improved upon. There's always room for improvement in every program, no matter how good it is. And I mentioned earlier that there are still a few little flaws. What needs to be done or can be done is to restrict pro-inflammatory items that are still there. There are no restrictions on the amounts of sugars that are served in those meals. A lot of the meals still have some hydrogenated products, which is a hardened fat like a margarine, and there are still processed foods being served in schools. Anti-inflammatory items could also be added to further improve that program, such as the items you see on the chart here: berries, green leafy vegetables, nuts, fatty fishes, and some more fruits, all very healthy and would decrease that inflammatory response even further. To summarize my study, I examined the differences in grade school student BMI percentiles before and after the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act. The school years 2008 and 9 and 2012-13 were compared to each other using the variables of BMI percentiles, ethnicity, gender, student enrollment, free or reduced lunch eligibility, and total school lunch sales. All that I gathered from the Pennsylvania Departments of Health and Education. Using a combination of chi-square and t-tests, my analysis revealed a significant difference in BMI measures, the number of students in each ethnic category, and the number of students that purchased lunch, total lunch sales. There was not a significant difference in the number of students for each gender category, free or reduced lunch eligibility, or the number of students enrolled per study year. The findings suggest that the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act of 2012 was successful in reducing student obesity statistics, which is a wonderful thing. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ritenour. Thank you for the great presentation. I'm going to pass things back to Dr. Cardillo for some summary comments on this research study. Dr. Cardillo?
Yes, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Dr. Ritenour. Now you understand why I say that this is a good study. Dr. Ritenour just delivered a great introduction to childhood obesity, how this occurs. And this was a good way to introduce us to the literature review and essentially define some of the measures that can be taken to prevent childhood obesity. Her hypothesis in this case is based on her experience with children in the school setting, and her methodology is also based on a very reliable measure, the body mass index. So this is a clear example how you can take what we call secondary data analysis, or an existing data set that was actually collected for a different purpose, or it was collected and never reached the point to be analyzed in a way that can produce good results, or results that can be applicable to public health, to school district, to wherever the outcome is aiming for that particular research. And again, a clear example how to use this, how to be clever on a dissertation proposal without spending a great deal of funding or resources to do something that is extremely meaningful. And so because the goal here is not to get technical, by the way, you can get the technical information by searching or finding the dissertation that Dr. Ritenour has produced, but we don't want to get technical and provide details on methodology and the analysis. I like basically to repeat the key conclusions here for the research, which I believe are excellent. The Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act did decrease childhood BMI as planned. That is great. That is a big statement and can be used for by policymakers. A surplus of healthier meals were sold to the American youth. Again, more policies can be drafted with that. And something that is really interesting is, and I appreciate the statement that Dr. Ritenour present, that the overall program, the cost of the overall program versus the cost of caring chronic diseases in childhood obesity, there is no point of comparison there. And you can basically create new studies, you can basically move in that direction trying to prove that, and it will be interesting to see how many folds or to what degree that can be proven or that can be asserted. But that is also an excellent outcome from this study, an excellent outcome from this research that she has presented. So I think with this, I'd like to open the floor to everyone that had already presented questions, and Daniel is going to help us on the questions that are presented for the presentation that we just saw. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cardillo. We do have a few questions in already, and just as a reminder, if you have any questions, have any comments, because this is definitely a place for people to share their own experiences with research as well. Just find the question box on your control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. It's about halfway down, submit your question there. First question we have, this one is for you, Dr. Ritenour. Will you research teaching parents how to make better lunches?
Will I or have I?
Well, yeah, actually, with your experience, let's do both. Will I and have you?
I have not. This dissertation is the first research I had ever conducted, and that is a very good topic for anyone that is listening, or even for myself. I think with parents, serving better lunches or preparing better lunches comes education for parents, because this inflammatory response that has taken place is not very well known to the public. As a health teacher, I know that my textbooks still say 100% calories in equals calories out, and there is no mention of an inflammatory response to certain types of food. And I would assume that most parents to high school age students or younger this day and age may not know the current literature as well. So for us to get better home-packed meals brought into the schools, schools need to reach out to parents and share that information, and teachers need to share that information with the students now, so that when they are grown and raising children, they can then pack those healthier meals for those kids. So an outreach program needs to be created to do that.
Thank you. And this next question, this is also for you, Dr. Ritenour. Obviously, your research has shown that there have been benefits with childhood obesity, but are there other benefits that could become apparent over time, such as productivity at school and other things that aren't directly tied to disease or student health?
I don't have the research in front of me to give exact numbers or statistics, but I have read that our daily intake has a lot to do with the way that we sleep, the way that we manage our stress, the way that we think and express ourselves. So socially and mentally and emotionally and physically, these things, our daily intake affects us. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so in summation, what you're saying is our daily food intake is really the catalyst for everything else.
It is. It gives us the energy to do the things that we need to do, and if you know, without the research in front of me, I would think that we would be more productive individuals all around if we were to change our diet.
Yeah, yeah, and a further comment just came in on that question is that that's likely something that would take a much longer period of time to ascertain. Weight loss can go down quickly, whereas productivity, grades, so on and so forth, that's something that is going to be much more of a long-term picture. So
thank you for that addition.
And last question we have, and just a reminder, if you have any more questions, please submit them via the control panel, the question box. Last question I have for you is that during your presentation, Dr. Ritenour, you mentioned that costs for this program were much higher, but you did mention the positive, which is that it was an upfront investment over the future of the student's lifetime and avoiding potential chronic diseases. When do you think, from a cost-benefit standpoint, that that someone will be able to look at this program and be able to say, like, while there's a lot of upfront costs, it's actually a net benefit over time because there are fewer students with, for example, diabetes, or fewer students who are obese?
I think that could be determined now. Schools had the option of opting out of the federal funding if they found this to be unfeasible, if they weren't able to meet the cost demands. And the last I read, there were only 3 or 4 schools total across America that had actually pulled out. So schools have learned throughout the past several years, this has been in play for a good 5 years now, to balance out the costs of the actual food items with the preparation. The cafeteria staff has learned to quickly prepare the foods as compared to those first couple years when it was a transition. And they had to change from the deep fat fryers to the baking ovens, so that transition time has passed. Schools are not pulling out of this program. Children are losing the visceral adipose tissue or size of tissue. So I think now it can be said the benefits have outweighed those costs.
And we actually just got 2 more questions in, and again, both of these are for you, Dr. Ritenour. The first question is the menu does the menu? I'm trying to read this correctly. Sorry. Does the menu contain enough fats and proteins for underweight children? And to the audience member who asked that, if I phrased that incorrectly, please clarify.
That's honestly not a question I can answer. I do know that if you were to look on their website or in my dissertation, there are fat content requirements, so there does have to be a specific number of types of fat, and there are limits to the bad fats. Whether or not those are enough to meet the demands of someone who is currently underweight is not a question that I could answer. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. And that's fine. You don't have all the answers quite yet, but soon. And last question we have for you is that there's always an assumption that one who packs their food is generally going to be eating healthier versus eating out or eating at school. Do you know the reason why packed lunches are so much unhealthier than what schools are offering? Is because of something as simple as parents cutting corners and packing lunches that are, Lunchables or, cupcakes, or is it something else?
You did cut out there for a little bit, so I'm going to clarify your question if you don't mind. You're asking why, per se, the home-packed meals have been unhealthier? Is that basically the question?
Yes, correct. Because there's an assumption if you're packing at home, one would have control over what foods go into the lunch.
Okay. Keep in mind, if anyone is listening that's a parent, it doesn't mean that all home-packed meals are unhealthy. So I don't want anyone to think that it was an insult. But overall, statistically, they have been less healthy. And from what I have found in the research, it is because the foods that can be kept in a lunchbox for several hours until a child gets to lunch have more preservatives, are easy to purchase in a store in a little small snack pack size. Like you said, the Lunchables, they last longer. They're small packed, so potato chips, sugary drinks, cans of soda, the Lunchables are high in sodium. Those types of items go packed right into a nice lunchbox and can sit for 3 hours until they get to lunch. So they're convenience items.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ritenour, and thank you, everyone in the audience, for great questions. I'm going to pass things back to Dr. Cardillo to close out today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Okay, Daniel, thank you, and thank you, everyone, again. I am glad all the questions went to Dr. Ritenour because she was the presenter, and with this, we're going to close the webinar. Once again, thank you, everyone, for attending and participating in today's core webinar. The title was Student Health Before and After the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, presented by Dr. Cris Ritenour. We will be sending you a link to the recording of today's session and also the slide deck later this week. Our next core webinar will be on December, hosted by Dr. Tracy Marin, a doctoral director of the College of Health and Human Services. And if you would like to reach out to today's presenter or myself, our contact information is on the screen right now. So please take a note and feel free to contact us directly. And once again, thank you and good evening to everyone.